here's one for you. Riddle me this. How the hell did we wind up with Elon? could, couldn't he
Yeah.
kept his ass in South Africa and he could live in his little apartheid bubble and
But even South Africa doesn't want that anymore. They
no,
don't.
they don't.
They got rid
That's
of
the
that shit a
irony.
long time ago. Yeah, thanks. We're not importing apartheid into America. That's not happening. Sorry. Michael, it goes back to that Citizens United decision. I hate to say it. I talk about this on my show.
Mm-hmm.
When the Supreme Court cited the way it did in the Citizens United case and opened up the floodgates of dark money, corporate money, super rich, wealthy guy money into the system, I think that really impacted our democracy in a way that we're still feeling now. When Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, can dump $290 million into Donald Trump's race back in 2024.
$26 million into the special election.
The
for
Wisconsin
the
thing.
State Supreme Court in Wisconsin, yeah.
And Michael, how in the hell is it legal? You know this stuff back and forth and up and down. How is it legal that you hand out $1 million checks to people?
It
doesn't sound legal to me.
It's not.
I mean,
and the moment the Democrats remember, this is the same Republican Party that pitched a bitch when you had states saying, okay, you can hand out water to people standing in line.
You couldn't do cookies. Remember in Georgia, you couldn't do cookies. You couldn't bring people water.
You can't have water, but I can hand your ass a $1 million check.
Somebody make that make sense. I honestly, we are living in a world where the oligarchs are calling the shots.
Yeah.
And, this people might be like, oh, you sound like, what is this, the resistance and all this shit? Give me a break. Give me a break. When Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, can hand out $1 million checks in a state Supreme Court election, in basically a local election.
Right.
I'm sorry, something is rotten in Denmark. And not to sound like JD Vance, but something is rotten in Denmark. And to me, we got to put a stop to this. And remember last weekend, heading into last weekend, the attorney general in Wisconsin was going to the courts and saying, we're going to do something about this. And out of nowhere, Elon Musk is like, oh yeah, never mind. It's if you sign a petition, then you get the $1 million. Right. It's like, the hand got caught in the cookie jar. And so now I'm going to tell a different story. Sorry, we have to have rules of the road when it comes to our elections. It can't just be handing out checks.
You can't, and yet here we are. I fear that. Well, a couple of things. One, the fact that the Wisconsin Supreme Court refused to take up the matter to definitively say, no, you can't do this, to me was very problematic.
Yeah.
And two, more broadly speaking, Jim, when you look at our own Supreme Court and a number of the issues that are working their way through the pipelines right now related to the firing of federal employees, the shutting down of departments that are clearly put together and funded and are there because Congress wanted them to be there. The narratives around areas like USAID, a lot of folks are still looking at the I guess the bulwark here being the Supreme Court, being our courts generally. How do you think that's going to hold up? How do you think that, the lawyers are already capitulating.
Yeah.
Our judges next, I guess, is the question.
Well, and you saw the Chief Justice, John Roberts, put out that statement a week and a half ago or so and said, sorry, President Trump, he didn't mention him by name, but said you can't impeach judges because you don't like the way that they rule in certain cases. But I have to say back to Chief Justice John Roberts, what my mom used to say, you make your bed, you lie in it.
Mm-hmm.
The immunity decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court
gave
Donald Trump and his book the green light to run roughshod over the rest of this country. And you know what? And Trump is going to do it. You hand him that kind of a green light, that kind of a blank check. He's going to go and do as much as he possibly can do. The Stephen Millers of the world, the Elon Musks and Steve Bannons of the world, they're going to run wild with that kind of stuff. And so, of course, the Chief Justice, you have to understand, you've emboldened the current occupant of the Oval Office. And, and so it's going to be incumbent upon the Supreme Court, it seems to me, to act as a bulwark. to stop some of these shenanigans as these cases make their way to the high court. But at the same time, and it's not too fashionable these days to praise Joe Biden. But when President Biden left office and he gave that speech warning about an oligarchy coming forward in this country, and when he was out there calling for term limits for the Supreme Court, to me, I thought some of that made a hell of a lot of sense to me. The fact that you can put people on the Supreme Court now in their 40s and hope they live 50 years until their 90s, it's just like this ideological arms race.
Yeah.
And you almost need like a timeout in this country where you're going to say, okay, you can only serve for 20 years or whatever it's going to be. And then I think at that point, the parties might cool their jets and say, okay, maybe we'll just go and find the best people, the best minds to be on the court. And I'm not saying the ones who were put on recently are not the best minds, but my point is you probably wouldn't have Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court or Brett Kavanaugh. You just wouldn't have.
You wouldn't have had those two. Both of whom's biggest calling card was they had already promised that they would do the pro-life thing.
Exactly. That was it.
And that was, the idea that, and for people to be so naive as to believe that, those conversations never happened. They never, said before. Bullshit. I mean, they sat in front of the committee, every last one of those appointees, and lied. They perjured themselves.
They did,
because
they're on the Supreme Court.
To get on the Supreme Court, they said that stare decisis, what has come, the law of the land. We respect tradition. It's all bullshit.
It's all
because
bullshit.
The first chance they could get to overturn precedent, they took it. And so you're right. I mean, I've always been of the view, hey, let the Supreme Court is that, and our judiciary. I've always hated the idea of electing judges because you then make them nothing more than a politician.
Exactly.
And so governors should be the ones, or state legislatures should be the ones putting people on the bench as representatives of the people of their cities, their communities, their states, and the country. But we do have elected judges. And to the extent that they have to run, then they need to run in the cleanest nonpartisan lane possible. And that certainly starts with not having some son of a bitch like Elon Musk dropping $26 million into. Elon Musk couldn't tell you where Wisconsin was.
Exactly.
I mean, let alone.
He was coming out. Did you see him coming out the other day with the cheese head on, and he's jumping up. He's doing that jumping up and down dance again. I'm like, what's that jumping up and down dance thing, man? He's
a 10-year-old. I mean, he and Trump were 10-year-old boys who owned their corner of the playground, and have now expanded that reach to the rest of the playground. And here we are. We're watching these idiots jump up and down. Donald Trump sit there, do that dumbass. They can't dance, never could dance. And now you got all these white folks running around like they're having seizures trying to imitate Trump dancing. I mean, what the fuck is your problem?
I know. And the YMCA, I'm sorry, this is not a wedding back in the 1980s. You know what I mean? Like, can we find some different?
I know that's a gay anthem, right?
Well,
hey, Republicans, that's a gay anthem, right? You remember you didn't get that part?
I don't think he realizes that if they're going to have this problem with the Kennedy Center, he should. Yeah. But I mean, but the other thing too is like our democracy should be insulated against this kind of crap. Yes. Honestly, it should be insulated against this kind of Elon Musk bullshit. And the idea that, they're going to go after you if you do anything at a Tesla dealership, you're going to be a terrorist, and we're going to send you, you're going to be out of here and all. I mean, they're just bending. It's like they're bending the knee to Trump, bending the knee to Elon Musk. Elon Musk has no business having this much power and influence in our government. He just doesn't.
Got how many federal contracts right now? He's basically blocked and tackled Blue Horizon out of the space race because he controls the space game now. He's going to be the one to declare Mars for him, for Trump or him or both. His rockets are blowing up on the pad. So, dude, focus on getting your rockets to stop blowing up.
Or your Tesla stock prices stop dropping.
Right, the Tesla stock prices to stop. And could you design a car that doesn't look like a piece of shit? So let's move from the domestic space to the foreign policy space. You have covered that area as well. What's your down and dirty on the play right now with Ukraine? You had Trump recently being very, quote, very angry, pissed off even at Vladimir Putin. You know, because the way they, went about doing this whole, oh well, we're negotiating this settlement, and Vladimir was like, "That's not what I told you on the phone."
Yeah.
Dude, that's not
Yeah.
what I told you.
Right.
What do you think this how this ends up?
You know, this is one of the most important questions that we all face right now is what happens to Ukraine. And because you can't, it's not a stretch to say if Ukraine falls, that Vladimir Putin is going to go after a NATO country. And if Vladimir Putin goes after a NATO country, what does Donald Trump do then?
Right.
My guess is if it's one of the smaller Baltic states or
He
Moldova,
let it go.
he's just going to let that go. So then that means that NATO really doesn't exist anymore, that it's a paper tiger. And that creates a much more dangerous world. It says to China, you can do what you want in Taiwan. Apparently, the Chinese were just making some comments about the Taiwanese leadership just in the last day or two, making some very hot comments that you don't typically hear out of Beijing, and some of that's pretty some worrisome stuff. And so the world becomes a lot more unpredictable if we continue to go down this foreign policy path that Trump has laid out. Now, to some extent, trying to get both parties at the table to adopt some sort of ceasefire or a cessation to fighting and so on. Sure, a lot of that makes sense. Everybody would like to see the war in Ukraine end, but it can't happen without Zelensky at the table. It can't happen without the Ukrainians at the table in earnest. And this idea that Trump and Putin can create some kind of deal without Zelensky and the Ukrainians at the table is just not going to happen.
How
And
do you
so,
do that though, Jim? I
yeah,
mean, when they all gathered in
yeah,
Dubai or wherever they were. Um, how do you have a meeting to talk about a ceasefire between two countries
yeah,
and not have the country that was invaded in the room, let alone at the
yeah,
table, but in the room to have that conversation, and
yeah,
the rest of the world seemingly look at that and say, well, we hope something good comes out of that. Nothing good can come out of that when you've got clearly the US siding against its ally,
yeah,
taking up the Russian cause because Trump has his head up Putin's ass.
yeah,
And the fact of the matter is, NATO are alliances that have looked to the US to be that stabilizer, the one that would come to the table and say, okay, both y'all need to come in the room, sit down, and we're going to work this out.
yeah.
That's gone. So does Europe step up? I've been begging that question for the last
I
year.
think that's what you're going to see happen, Michael. I think you're going to see, and there was some talk of Trump proofing Europe and so on before Trump came back into office, and I think they're going to continue to try to do that work. Emmanuel Macron has talked about this, a new security posture for Europe, and Keir Starmer, I think, is of the same mindset. May want to do it a slightly different way, but I think that is what you're going to see evolve over the next couple of years because you said it, you nailed it right on the head. Um, Honestly, and I've talked about this time and time again. At every turn, Donald Trump sides with Vladimir Putin. There isn't, you can barely cite a scenario where Donald Trump does not take Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin's side in things.
Right.
And it's just the damnedest things. I was in Helsinki when that whole debacle went down, when Trump said that he trusted the Russians more than his own U.S. intelligence community in terms of the assessment as to whether the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. There's just something weird and quirky and funny that is going on between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And maybe it'll be the Scooby-Doo mystery that finally gets solved one day. We'll find out it's old man Withers.
I think we're going to find out.
We're going to find out what the hell is going
Yeah.
on with those two.
Yeah.
But it seems to explain quite a lot. And to me, that's the whole ball game right there. When we solve that, we figure that out. It's going to explain a lot.
Yeah, I think part of it, a kernel of a seed was planted in terms of the answer to that question by his son, which one? Not Junior, Eric, who bragged during the 16 campaign about how much the Russians had funded so many of their projects.
That's right.
From their hotels, so some of their hotels in New York, to certainly a lot of their overseas financings for their golf course in Ireland and their golf course, here or there. And it got me to thinking at the time, I was like, well, if the Russians are putting up the money behind all of these projects that Trump seemingly has in play, and his desire to open a hotel in Moscow, Trump Tower,
Yep.
Moscow,
Yep.
which is
I
still
remember that.
a driving thing for him.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, once they sized up that weakness in the man,
Yeah.
just the sheer promise of, yeah, you'll get your hotel.
It's called leverage, and
It's
Donald
called
knows
leverage.
he knows this all too well. And the other aspect of this, Michael, is there's been this theory that's been put forward by people who want to look past the leverage thing and the business side of this, and they're just wondering whether Trump and Putin and Xi just sort of have this spheres of influence mentality that that Trump will control the Americas and Putin will have his control over parts of Europe, and Xi will be able to reign over parts of Asia. And that's really what's going on here. These three guys, I think that might be part of it, kind of a czarist view
Mhm.
of, these spheres in the world and so on. But damn, if there's just something else going on. And I just wish we could figure that out. And I think that's where Zelensky is in so much trouble right now, because, one of the things that I will tell people, because I've had some firsthand experience with this, the Ukrainian people have just been so brave and courageous through all of this. It would just be a crying shame to throw them to the lions. I mean,
Yeah.
on my old show, I had a couple of fighter pilots on, Moonfish and Juice. Those are the names they went by because they couldn't go by their
Real
God-given
names,
names. The
right.
Russians would go find their families and kill them. And I interviewed both of them. Both of those pilots are dead. I interviewed another special forces soldier, a woman, who was on my show, and she was blown up in an IED explosion and somehow lived. She somehow lived,
Wow.
Adriana. She came on my show one time and brought me this steel coin that was made out of the steel of a blown up Russian tank. And I'll never forget that experience, meeting these brave Ukrainian people, and to think we would turn our backs on
Yeah.
them and
Yeah.
screw them over in this fashion. It's just un-American that we would do that.
Well, to your very important point, they should remind us of the once fabled patriots who refused to succumb to the harsh wishes of a rogue king of England, and they decided to stand their ground on this
Correct.
little tract of land that would become a very powerful nation. And you hear that a lot in the voices, not just of Zelensky,
Yeah.
but of the very people you just described.
Yeah.
Those men and women, those grandmothers who are standing there, where do I need to aim, right?
Exactly.
To defend their block,
Yeah.
to defend their neighborhood.
And
They're not-
the Russians abducted those children, those Ukrainian
Yes,
children, and took them
yes,
over the border into Russia to turn them in. What kind of monstrous, crazy ass Nazi shit is that?
yeah,
How can
yeah.
we possibly be on the other side of the equation? We have to back these people. It's just there aren't two sides to that. There aren't two sides to a story when it's a matter of right versus wrong. That's the side we should be on as Americans. And to think that we would just throw these people away out of expediency or for some rich minerals deal or so, that's all
And
horseshit
look,
compared
and
to what the heart of the matter here.
and the Republican members of Congress who now have sided with the evil empire, have sided with the Russian bear over
Yeah,
the freedom of individuals like the Ukrainians, should be ashamed of themselves. I mean,
I agree.
they're pathetic little wimps who don't have a ball among them to stand up to the bully on the playground and
Yeah.
tell him, no, we're not this is not who we are. But then maybe Jim, for Republicans, this is who they are, that we finally have the covers peeled back
Mm.
And we realize, and it's a revelation, and it's a little bit of a personal challenge for a lot of Republicans like myself, who,
Yeah.
were fighting some of these urges and these efforts inside the party. Um, paid some coin for that, in terms of, the price that you pay for trying to stand up against it, but
Yeah.
seemingly still were able to move the party along.
Yeah.
But then maybe, the party just they got to Trump and they said, we don't have to go any further. This is who we are. That we are, at the end of the day, a bunch of neo-Nazi loving white nationalists supporting, Christian nationalist assholes who love, doing what we're doing. So we don't have a
Yeah.
problem having the Russians take kids from their family, from their home country, and send them off to Russia to become Russians.
Yeah.
I,
I don't
I,
know. There's a price to be paid, though, right? There's a price to be
yeah,
paid when we don't stand on the side of good, when we don't stand on the side of
it was a
humanity.
dear price to pay.
And that's what I worry about. And that's why it gets back to, we just got to stand our ground for this American way of life that you and I grew up with, Michael. We got to hand off to the next generations some semblance of the America that we grew up with, or we're just utter failures as a generation.